sometimes, sometimes, we just need to make certain decisions. We just need to close certain doors and move on. Welcome everybody to another episode from Inside Treasures. My name is Phoebus and I love to challenge myself and those around me for the purpose of growth. This podcast is about helping you to heal, to change, and to grow. This particular episode is all about making decisions and closing doors. And this was exactly what was happening for me. See, I was stuck between decisions. I was stuck between two words in my life. On one sense, I was trained and I have been working really hard to be a web developer. And then I had this other strand in my life of self-development or self-growth, of becoming a coach. But I kept going back and forth from each one of these things. And I actually could not really decide what it was that I wanted to do. I wanted to do both. Because I liked both things, so why should I just choose one? I just couldn't really get it. I thought I can make this work. The reality was that I had to close the door and I had to move on. And this happened over a conversation with a friend which we were going to sit together and actually build something in the web development sphere and create something meaningful that we wanted to. Of course, I was super excited doing that, and even talking about it now, I can get excited about that, but that's what was kind of keeping me from taking that decision. Until that one day, which we went away with my friend, and at some point we sat by the beach and we started talking with each other. And he asked me a question, basically, that he has asked me before. He just told me, so where are you at? What are you up to? Do you think this is still going to happen? And that wasn't the first time that he asked me that question. He had asked me that question before. But I always kind of told him where I was and told him I still feel that we can make this work. Yet the time was passing by, the time has passed by until this incident, and we just hadn't made it happen. More and more, I just realized how much more I was actually more invested into helping other people, into growing my podcast, into helping other people through coaching. But that day, I had really thought about it for a very long time. So I felt certain that I had to make a decision. I had to close that old door into the web development world. And so I did. On that conversation, I said, look, the truth is, I've been meaning to make this work for a long time. And I know you've been excited, and I've been excited, and actually I haven't been wanting to let you down. But the truth is, my heart isn't fully in this. The truth is that at the moment, this is something that gets in the way of what I want to create. And what I had to do was close the door, was vocalize the things that come to me again and again, because I didn't just think of it that day. This was something that was happening for me. And it was coming, and then the tide would go, and I would forget about it. Then it would come back. So I was avoiding making a decision. I was avoiding closing a door. Life sometimes can become very confusing. We want to go somewhere. We want to do something. We want to create a change. But the truth is as we grow up, we build all these habits. We build all these beliefs about ourselves, about the world, and all these things that we kind of carry around. And what that reminds me of is that cartoon that I used to watch when I was a little boy, Lucky Luke, which they had the Daltons and they were the criminals. But basically they would put them to jail, and then they would always have these big iron balls chained to their feet. And they would kind of hold it in their hands and try to walk around because they couldn't do much with them. They couldn't really run away because they always had these big iron balls holding them down. And that's how I see things in life a lot of times, with myself and with those around me. And the whole idea is, how can we cut off those chains and actually get going and moving into the direction we want to go without having to drag all this weight, without having to drag all this baggage? So where does this indecision really stem from? Where is it that when we have dilemma of doing different things, when we know perhaps that we should just make a decision and close on the door and move on? But what happens when we start to think about that? And that's not for the people who are decisive and they just make a decision and move on. This is for those of us who actually find it very hard to decide on things, who find it very hard to let go and move on into something else, who find it very hard to close the door. So for most people, this is really based in ego and fear. These two kind of come into play and they don't allow us to make those decisions. The fear can be about this is a fear of making a mistake, a fear of this is not going to work out, a fear of how will I make it, how will I manage, what if I miss out? So in that environment of fear, we get doubt and we get uncertainty as well. And these are like the siblings of fear. They come along and they're like, okay, now we're going to make sure that you stay where you are because we're going to give you more doubt and uncertainty and more fear. And then it can also be greed. I want it all. I can have it all. So why not? Should I not have it all? Why should I close the door and move on? The other big thing, like that's also underneath that, is attachment. The willingness that we really attach to the thing that we want to. We're really attached to the thing where we're at, and we don't want to let it go. So by not letting it go, we get stuck. A lot of what comes from that as well is that we find ourselves being stuck into our own heads. So we delay making a decision in the name of insecurity and uncertainty. We keep entering into a debate that we don't need to enter within our own minds. And of course, if we're busy debating and keep losing on that new decision, we find ourselves getting trapped in our heads, not taking action, not closing those doors, and going back and forth all the time. Now that we understand where this is stemming from, what is it that we can actually do about it? I want to draw a key distinction here about connecting with your intuition when you're making a decision, connecting with your intuition when you have to close doors. Because basically, our thinking, our intuition is going to flag us that we need to make a change. That happens in a lot of different ways. But if you're having that repeated thought, a few days in a row, week after week, here and there, there's something that yourself is telling you that you need to change about this. So learning to tune in and listen. Right now, when I'm referring to intuition, I'm referring to that gut feeling, to that heart feeling that gives us a sense of the truth. It's that thermometer, it's that feeling within us that we can sense without having to think, without having to rationalize, of what is true for us now. Remember that intuition doesn't mean impulsive. Having a feel for that gut feel, for that what you're feeling in your heart, is actually taking a gauge within you to make sure that something is where it needs to be. It's not about being impulsive, it's not about being highly emotional, because when we're in that space of being highly emotional and impulsive, it can be a lot of fun. For sure, but it can also mean that we have zero logic. When we go with our intuition, we can be spontaneous. We can appear as if we are impulsive, but actually we're following through in something that we feel inside us being true. Notice that keen distinction within you and try to understand it for a moment. Just really let it settle in a deeper level, so you know that when you're looking within to understand what your gut feels, what your heart feels, that what you're getting is all the distilled knowledge that it can give you that quick temperature for you to know where you're at. By doing that, we know whether we should keep going with something or whether we should close the door. When we can sense that deep within us, there's no reason to rationalize. There's no reason to think about. There's no reason to look at pros and cons and all this stuff, which can be very, very useful. And there might be something that you can use as far as closing the door down on the things that you're doing. But the more you make those decisions, the more you lean into understanding how you feel within, you're going to become more and more sensitive to that sensation of how it feels inside you. And by doing that, we'll learn to trust it more and more because we're listening to it, we're making decisions. Even if the decision takes us somewhere else, which it's not the desired place, or it might appear as if it's a bad place, actually it's taking us to where we need to be at. Sometimes we send away those feelings of our intuition is giving us. We kind of numb it down. So our intuition will give us a hint, it will give us a response, and we kind of push it away. And on this occasion, it's like we push it away in the wrong way because it's actually telling us what we understand to be true for us. And that's what's the most important thing is this true for me? That's about connecting with our intuition and our inner truth. The more we listen into that, the more that we allow that to lead in our life, the more sensitive we become to it. Part of that has to do with how much trust and faith we have in it. But remember that from these things, look into your life and actually remember the times that you had just faith into that voice that came from within you. And if you don't have that faith, just start applying a little bit of faith. And with time, listening to it and having faith that it's true for you, that it's good for you, start to build that belief that will lead to the trust, that will lead into a deep knowing that it's going to be okay, that what this voice is telling you is actually going to help you, that you will be okay, and whatever it is that you're doing will be okay. As you see, this is dwelling a little bit further than making decision and closing doors. But I felt that it was an important element for you to take away, and it fits so nicely with closing doors and making decisions, because we have to check in on ourselves. What is our version of the truth? What do we feel within us that's right? And what do we feel within us that's off or wrong? You might be wondering now, okay, I get it. Like, I understand why this is happening. I understand that I need to trust myself more and my intuition, what it's telling me, train myself more into that by basically putting myself in those situations. But how do I exactly close doors? How do I exactly can make decisions that can help me? When it comes into making decisions, particularly when it has to do with closing doors, one of the things that I found important is for us to feel grounded. A lot of times with making those decisions, especially when it's based on fear and insecurity and uncertainty, we're not really holding down. We're not really grounded into where we are. And if we're not grounding and we're kind of dangling up in the air, it's very hard for us to be able to make that decision because we're not stepping on anything. And that's why sometimes it takes a long time for us to really go down low until we can actually put our feet nice and steady on the floor. When we're nice and steady on the floor, when we feel grounded, and that is a metaphor, but also it applies into how we do that within us. So number one rule for me for this strategy to work is find a way to get grounded. Find a way to quieten down yourself, quieten down your mind, and feel more present in the here and now. Whether you're meditating, whether you're using mindfulness, whether you can do this after you exercise, as long as you're too tired and you still have that stamina within you, that oomph behind you. The whole point is to feel supported. We need that sense of support. The simplest thing to do is just stop whatever you're doing, take a few breaths, slow it all down. Step number one, get grounded. Step number two is to acknowledge your attachment to what it is. What am I attached to? Is a really great question to get started and get going. What am I really attaching myself to? What is that thing that I kind of keep wanting to keep and I can't let it go? Because if I could, I would have closed the door already. So there's something for me. We don't need to get lost in this bit. Again, just allow yourself to come up with something. What is it? What am I attaching myself to? And just acknowledge that that's what it is. The next step is optional. It's figure out what it is that you want instead. Now, sometimes we really don't know what we want instead. And that's why it's optional. And sometimes the way to find out what we want instead is to close that door. It is to lean in. It is to move on. It's that I'm no longer willing to do this. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm no longer willing to do this. And I'm waiting for the answers to appear into the future. But right now, I'll take this firm decision that I'm no longer willing to do this anymore. And thus, we close the door. If you know what your next step is, or you want to spend the time to figure out, that's fine. And go ahead with that, because that will give your mind a new direction that you can head towards. Now, once you have that, or once actually your previous step tells you that I just need to close the door now, all we have to do, again, through that grounding position, through that supportive position of supporting ourselves, is to make a decision. Decisions are super powerful in the way that we look at things. And I know that we said we're talking about decisions, but this is the decision, deciding to decide what it is that we're deciding, if that makes sense. Once we decide, it's still not enough, because usually there's certain things we need to do. And it's about us leaning in with that commitment and saying, I'm going all in. I know that there might still be doubt, but I'm feeling certain in myself because of trust in myself that I have the ability to make this work. I know that I can close this door and I can move on, and I will be completely fine. The key thing to remember here is that you have to stick with that decision. Even if the inclination comes to go back into what was, even if the inclination comes to just go back running, opening the door, and we have to stick with it because we made that decision. And it's not whether we fail. So we might just go back a little bit, but then it's just like, okay, actually, I told myself that I'm taking this decision, that I've closed the door, into this past behavior, into this past thing that I have been doing, into whatever that is. I'm closing the door and I am committed to stay there. There's a caveat to this whole strategy. I know some of you might be like, okay, intuition, I get it, but sometimes I don't have enough information. Sometimes I just need to think about it a bit longer. And to that I say, cool, you need some more time. How much longer do you need? You need to give yourself a deadline, because otherwise it will end up being open-ended and you keep going and never making that decision, never closing that door. And I will tell you from my personal experience, it is not worth it at all. The reason is you will lose a lot of valuable time in which you could be discovering new things. As my friend Napoleon used to say, successful people make decisions quickly and change them very slowly. Unsuccessful people make decisions very slowly and change them often and quickly. That means that we never make up our mind and we keep changing from one thing to the other all the time, never sticking to something. But when we make a decision quickly, listen to our gut feel and our intuition, and then when we slowly change them, still adapt them maybe perhaps to where we're going. But when it comes into closing doors, we have to be firm, we have to be decisive, we have to be bold, and we just have to make the step of actually saying, that's it. With this, just remember that the whole point is not to always make the right decision, but the point is to make decisions. The point is to close doors that they're no longer serving us, and sometimes they will feel odd because we're in a new place. But what we're doing when we're closing doors and we kind of keep looking behind us as if we're driving and we keep looking our rear view mirror. And it's not like we're taking a few glimpses to make sure, okay, we're in the right place, there are no cars coming, but actually we fixate looking backwards. And when we're looking backwards, of course, we're not looking where we're going, and we end up into trouble. And that's why it's important to dedicate ourselves to that decision that we make. That when we close the door, we're decisive now. We've decided that, and we're moving forward with faith and trust and knowledge that it will be fine. Remember that most doors, they can be reopened anyway. There are very few things that if we shut the door, we are unable to reopen it again. But that doesn't mean move ahead half-hearted towards the thing that you want. But know that at the very back of your head, in your mind, and remember that. It's cool. You know what? Actually, if it went really that terribly wrong, I could always turn around. I can. But I'm not willing to turn around anymore, and that's why I'm shutting the door. And that's why I'm moving on, because I've made something else more important, or I've made it really important for me to shut this door and to say, no more. And when I go to that, I give it my all. I'm fully present into the new possibilities. And if I don't know where I'm going, I just give that sensation to myself. And now I can feel more alive. I can feel more supportive of that decision that I have made. So stop fretting over it and just get on with it. Making decisions and closing door is another one of those skills that we can build. And the more that we use them, the more we train ourselves, the more that we build them, the better we become, the better we get. And it's the same with our intuition. And these things, they link together. Again, it's a matter of practice. I tend to share things that we can build. I tend to share things that we can just try again until we get better at them. Replace breadth with depth. The minute we start closing doors, we start limiting our options. We start limiting our range. And of course, we limit where our energy goes. Instead of it being scattered throughout, we help to nourish it and cultivate it, and also drive it, focus it into what matters most to you. I guarantee you that once you go all in, and once you close those doors that have been dragging you back, you will find peace, you will find clarity and certainty in yourself. If you want to fly, you have to let go of the weights that you have on you. The anchors that are keeping you back, the anchors that are keeping you down. Which door do you need to close in your life? What decisions do you need to make in your life? What are you currently doing that is certainly not serving you or distracting you from who you are, or perhaps from who you want to be? Is it in your work, your relationship? Is it an obsolete habit, an attitude, a limiting belief, a mindset shift? What is it for you? What do you need to change? What door must you shut? Think about that. And remember that when you close the door, another one will open. And without a doubt, you'll be in a new room, in a new place, with new possibilities for you to take advantage of. In a new place, lighter and more clear about where you are in your life. Now, I'm not really closing the door into this podcast, but I am closing the door to this season. So that's the end of season 2, and that's 30 episodes from Inside Treasures. It's been a great pleasure creating those, and I hope you've enjoyed them as much as I have. I'm here to help you heal, change, and grow. If there's something that resonated with you, something that you need help with, give me a shout at podcast@insidetreasures.com or connect to me on Instagram @insidetreasures. If this episode was meaningful to you in any way, and you love the messages in them, perhaps you would like to share it with other people. Share the messages, and also you can share this podcast. And that way, they can benefit the same way that you have. Thank you for tuning in to another episode from Inside Treasures. My name is Phoebus, and until next time, my friends, let peace guide your life, let love guide your heart, and reason guide your thoughts.